there. I figured that today I would talk a little bit about one of my favorite types of board games and card games and party games. And when I say type, I don't necessarily mean the theme or the story or the kind of motif or anything like that, or what it's about per se. I mean the mechanism or mechanic, as some people might call it that. And I have a lot of different favorite mechanics, but I think my favorite mechanism of all for board games, if I had to pick just one, is simultaneous action selection games. Board games. When I say board games, I mean generally tabletop games. I suppose that I don't say tabletop games because that also includes, tabletop role-playing games that are campaign-driven and don't really have components besides dice and paper. I like board games, I like card games, I like party games, anything that you can teach someone who's new and play in one sitting, whether it's, simple or complex. I think anything that fits into that category, I love. And there's a lot of different mechanisms that are great, but simultaneous action selection games, easily my favorite. So when I say simultaneous action selection, I mean that quite, literally everyone picks what they want to do at the same time, and then it's sort of revealed, or whatever they chose becomes resolved. I think that the simplest example of this that everyone probably knows is rock, paper, scissors. It's a really simple simultaneous action selection game. It's seemingly random in the sense that you don't know what the other person is going to pick. And you're guessing. And you don't have any other information to go off of other than what you know about them and what they've done before if you've played it multiple rounds with them. And I think that's interesting because there's a psychology to guessing what people will do when you're both choosing what to do at the same time. You can go by what you know about them as a person. You can go by what would be a good strategy or what might not be a good strategy. In the case of rock, paper, scissors, all three choices are equal outside of the psychological element. But, rock, paper, scissors, there isn't one of those three that's intrinsically more powerful than the other three. They just, one beats another and loses to another. So I think it's really interesting, and I think few reasons why simultaneous action selection games are so interesting. One is that there's that layer of tension, because you don't know what someone is going to pick, so you're trying to guess ahead of time what they're picking. At the same time, they're thinking the exact same thing about you, trying to guess what you are going to pick. And I think that's really exciting and thrilling and stimulating. It's engaging because you're in the moment and you're trying to guess, to pick. Now you can think of that as random, but of course it's not random. There's no dice rolling, there's no card draw that could be random or shuffled. you can deterministically pick any option that's available. You can say it's random in the sense that it's guessing, is unknown. And that brings interesting, discussion in and of itself. What counts as random? Throwing darts in the dark is only random in the sense that you don't know where the dartboard is, but you don't randomly have to pick a direction. You could theoretically pick any direction to throw the dart in, and maybe you have some clue about where the dartboard might be. It's only that analogy only works weakly, but I think it's there. So I think some of my favorite games that feature simultaneous action selection, probably in no particular order. There's Cash and Guns. Second edition with all the expansions is what I'm familiar with and what I love. There is Sneaks and Snitches. Probably my favorite and most pure, favorite form of pure simultaneous action selection, where that's really the core of it. There is Dixit, which uses simultaneous action selection in a very particularly creative and thoughtful way, where there's multiple layers to the guessing and multiple layers to the decision making and bluffing and trying to both fool someone else, other people, not be fooled by other people, and then also simply choose correctly, and there is a definite right and wrong answer ahead of time. Dixit is really wonderful. It's Dixit. Good party game for 4 to 6 players. I have my board game collection just over here off camera. And look at it here. And I think Kemet, it's Kemet. It's a war game. It's a conquest game in ancient Egypt with mythological creatures and huge armies and skirmishes and fights, and probably my favorite war and conquest game that there is. At its core, it's a conquest game that goes, is turn-based, turn by turn. But the combat, whenever two armies collide with each other and are fighting, that's resolved through a really beautiful and elegant but somewhat intricate simultaneous action selection mechanism, and it makes the combat so tense and fast-paced and interesting. It doesn't have the tedium that some combat and some conquest and war games have, where the dice rolling can go on forever for a single battle, and it truly is random. But in Kemet, it's deep and interesting and meaningful in the combat, and in large part because it's simultaneous action selection done really well. There's another game called Godzilla Stomp, which is probably the most simple form of simultaneous action selection that I've seen in a game. It's very, very simple, but for families, for children, for older folks, for non-gamers, to have a nice little party card game that's easy to play and pick up and easy to replay with simultaneous action selection. There's really none that are better than Godzilla Stomp. I always think of Sneaks and Snitches also, and that is probably a better game overall by a lot. But Godzilla Stomp is still easier to teach to non-gamers. So that's where it has time to shine, I think. And I look and I think think of games like Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, much more complex than Godzilla Stomp, but still quite short in terms of only being a half hour, 35 minutes, or shorter, but still much more simple as a game than Kemet. But in Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, it's all about each individual battle of a hero or villain or group of baddies or good guys colliding and confronting with each other. And that's resolved through a really well made and well created simultaneous action selection. And you don't have to have simultaneous action selection to be a great game. Many games don't have it at all, of course. But I find that in many of my favorite games, it's there. When I look at games that probably don't have any kind of structure to the turns of them per se, such as Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, which is a beautiful, brilliant game of secret identities, and it reminds me of a mishmash of concept. Resistance Avalon with the Merlin character, along with Mysterium, and there's another game it reminds me of. It's kind of escaping from me now. Deception, Murder in Hong Kong reminds me of a mix of Mysterium, Resistance Avalon, Concept. There's another, but I can't seem to find it. Well, what I say to folks is that it reminds me of these 4 games smushed together and yet more simple than all of them. And I think that's really wonderful. It's a really brilliant game, easily in my top 10. So it's not simultaneous action selection the way Cash and Guns is, but it is in the sense of that it's unstructured and people can kind of chime in and speak when they want and make the move when they want to, throw in their badge and make their accusation. And I think that's really extraordinary. A lot of secret identity games therefore kind of fall into that. But that's mostly a little bit of a tangent. I suppose it's not true simultaneous action selection the way Cash and Guns is, as I kind of described. And thinking of Cash and Guns, I think something about it that's so interesting is that the feeling of when you make your move, when you're ready to select, when you're ready to reveal what your selection is, you reveal it at the same time that you do it, and it's done not by putting a card into the middle of the table, but by literally pointing your gun at someone else. So the thing comes to life by the action that you're forced to do, which is pointing guns in each other's face. Not good for every environment or situation or atmosphere you're in, so you want to play accordingly. But Cash and Guns is one of those wonderful games. It's 4 to 6 players. It has these foam guns with orange tips, of course. And for anyone who's never really played an example of a simultaneous action selection game, as I'm speaking about, Cash and Guns would be a great place to start. It's 4 to 6 players, and it's terrific. there is Tides of Time, a little 2-player game that uses a pass and draft mechanic. Now, pass and draft is what I call it. I don't know if that's an official name of the mechanism, but it's a kind of drafting where you pick the card or thing you want, and then you take it, you use it. But it's simultaneous drafting. So pass and draft is like 7 Wonders. So it's a nice mix of simultaneous action selection with card drafting. And I think that's really cool. And I like 7 Wonders okay. And Tides of Time is only 2 players, and it's a bit of a point salad still. But I think that it's a great distillation and pure form of pass and draft. Sushi Go is kind of like that too, actually. But I like Tides of Time the most of those. So, the level of tension that you can have, and engagement and unknown factor of simultaneous action selection is really wonderful. But another element of it that makes it so great is the timing of it. Folks stay engaged because they can't afford to zone out. Oh, excuse me. They can't afford to zone out because it's not their turn. They don't have to feel bored or wait around for it to be their turn to do something. And a lot of games that support a lot of players, 5, 6, 7, 8, but there's a lot of options that you have on your turn. Even at lower player counts, they can sometimes drag because you're waiting for everyone else to do their turn, which often only indirectly involves you, unless they're actively fighting you. Those can really drag. So the original Bang the Card game, because it's turn-based, and it's not simultaneous, and the turns can go on for quite a bit of time, they're not really speedy, that can really drag when it's not your turn. Simultaneous action selection gets rid of that, because you're basically always playing in one capacity or another, not just listening to find out if it will affect you, but actively making a choice and resolving it. And I think that's pretty terrific. Space Alert is also not simultaneous action selection in the sense of you're all choosing at exactly the same time, but it is in terms of you're all making decisions and resolving them in real time, and it's cooperative with an actual timing mechanism. So that's a twist on it. Space Alert won't give you the same feel as a lot of those other games that I mentioned, like Godzilla Stomp or Sneaks and Snitches. But if you want a game where you stay engaged the whole time, almost to a fault of being too stressed, Space Alert is perfect, and then a fun, interesting, smart, sometimes humorous science fiction element. You're never bored during a game of Space Alert. You might be bewildered or confused or frustrated or amused, but you'll never be bored. Let's see. Another great simultaneous action selection game that I think is really underrated, but I think it's really wonderful, especially once you really start to get it, and once you really feel like you know what's going on, is Android Infiltration. It kind of came out the same time the new Android Netrunner came out, in 2012. And it's just a spin-off standalone game for like $25-$30 for 2 to 6 players. Maybe an hour long or so, maybe more or less. Your first game maybe a little bit more. And it's technically turn-based in the sense that you pass the first player marker / dial, and you there's an order to how you resolve things each turn based on the turn order. But it's still simultaneous action selection, where you're all choosing the action you want to do and effectively resolving it about the same time, in order where it conflicts, so to speak. But you're basically resolving it in real time, and you're certainly selecting it in real time. And that's where the namesake comes in, of course. It's wonderful science fiction, cyberpunk, I don't know, espionage, but heist game where you're all these cyber criminals in the future breaking into this facility, trying to get in all the data you can and download it and, fight your way through or lockpick your way through with digital locks and all these things, and sort of hack your way in to this facility and deciding how far you want to push in before you try to run back, so you don't get caught by the cops in the future. Whoever's left in is, they're on their own. So thematically, it's starting cooperative, that you're all thieves working together. But really, of course, it's a competitive game. And it is in that same vein, in that regard, of Cutthroat Caverns, where you can kind of screw each other over or put an oil slick in front of someone. Metaphorically, this doesn't have an oil slick. But in theory, you win it cooperatively. Dungeon Run had that theme as well. And it wasn't simultaneous action selection, though. And I'm really excited to get Bloodborne, the card game, which still has some simultaneous elements to it, but also has that Cutthroat Cavern style theme of we're kind of working together, but not really. We're going to screw each other over. And I like that a lot. I think it's fun. But Cutthroat Caverns and Bloodborne may not be really totally simultaneous action selection the way I describe, as it applies to, again, Sneaks and Snitches, or certainly Android Infiltration. If you haven't played a lot of simultaneous action selection games before, and you're curious about them, you can think of games where it's kind of close to simultaneous action selection, where there's elements that are like that. For instance, if you all have to vote at the same time and reveal your vote, like in Resistance, or anything like that, where you're choosing yes or no, or Dark Moon, when you're choosing to throw someone into isolation or not, or Battlestar Galactica, those votes, things like that. That's all simultaneous action selection embedded into a larger game. Same with simultaneous bidding, when everyone has a chance to bid all at once and then reveal their bid. I think that's really exciting, and that's a great example of how simultaneous action selection can be subtly inserted into really popular games that are otherwise turn-based. So if you like that element of those games, and you think it's cool, and you like that simultaneous gameplay, then definitely explore the category of games with the mechanic of simultaneous action selection. On Board Game Geek, if you go to mechanic and you click on that and then go by rank, you can go by top to bottom for how they're ranked and reviewed. For simultaneous action selection, I think I just like saying that phrase. Simultaneous action selection. Jamaica. Jamaica is this wonderful, beautiful looking, interesting pirate racing game. And it uses simultaneous action selection for what you're going to do that turn. If you're going to try to get gold or gunpowder or food, or if you're going to try to move forward that round, possibly getting into, cannon fights with other pirate ships as you race around the island of Jamaica. It's wonderful. And kind of like Infiltration, even though it's resolved in an order depending on the first player marker, it's still simultaneous in how you pick them, so you have that element of wondering what the other folks are going to do. And Jamaica's really a wonderful example of that. I can't believe I almost forgot about it as an example of that, but it really is one of the great ones. In fact, when I think about games with simultaneous action selection, they're almost always games that I love or at least like a lot. Very little hit or miss, it's mostly hit. Well, I don't know how relaxing or stimulating or interesting this video will be, but any suggestions, comments, critique? I'm still quite new at this, so it'll definitely help me. Feel free to like, subscribe, message. Sorry if I can't get back to everyone. All of that's appreciated. And suggestions about what you'd like to see more of, or what would make the videos better, or tips or techniques. Definitely love to hear those too. Thanks a lot for watching, and I definitely want to talk about more types of board games and just other things in general, but especially board games and H.P. Lovecraft and things I'm interested in, everything from psychology to weightlifting to cats to science to communications and romance and love and interpersonal things. It's all my areas of interest. So anything you'd like to hear me discuss or talk about, let me know. And thanks for watching.